So, good afternoon all. Welcome. We're here to tell a story of big stuff. I'm here with my friend and partner in crime, Bas Engel. Short, me, Eelco Rustenburg, helping out organizations from a consulting firm with their agile and scaled agile transformations. In this case, ASML. I've met Bas long before at Philips at the transformation, and we've been having a good ride there. And now we're here for the second home run, and that's what we're here to talk about. Maybe Bas, you can introduce yourself shortly, and take the lead in the first part.
I will. So I didn't ask him to make that whole story about the yellow and blue thingy. He hanged it over there. It was really important for him to show that he has a lot of leaflets. My name is Bas Engel. I'm department head at ASML. I'm there now for 2 years. I'm also leading the agile transformation in ASML. What we want to talk about is actually what we have been doing at ASML. We're going to start off by showing you briefly about what the company ASML is about and why we are doing a transformation. Then we're going to share with you a few things that we had to tweak in the framework to make it work. It's a transformation. I'm a department manager at ASML for software, but it's a transformation that actually goes across all disciplines in ASML. I want to share with you what tweaks we had to do to the framework to make it work. And then a second big part of the presentation that Eelco will give will all be about how do we now do the portfolio management in the context of ASML, where not everyone is doing safe, but a large part is, and an even bigger part is not. So that's a bit the setup of the story. First, just ASML, the story about the digitalization in the world, starting in the late 90s with the internet era coming up, moving over 2007, mobile phones, Internet of Things around 2012. Now you see artificial intelligence, big data lakes coming up. One thing they all have in common next to data, which fuels a lot of the business models behind it, are the chips. And in that sense, that's what ASML does. ASML doesn't manufacture the chips. They manufacture the machines that produce the chips. So our customers are the leading manufacturers in the world, like Intel, Samsung, Hynix, Micron, TSMC. Those are the leading manufacturers in the world of chips, and ASML builds the chips. Here you see one of the latest machines we have, the EUV machines. Last year, we were close to 11 billion company, over 2 billion in profit. Most of it goes back in R&D, so we invest heavily in R&D. We're close to 20% in R&D investment. And by now we're at 23,000 employees. And the 23,000 is where the problem arises at ASML. Because if you look back where we come from 35 years ago, we were a small company. We started off basically in a container as a spin-off of Philips. Most of the growth actually came from organic growth, hiring more people. And if you look at the number, in the past 2.5 years, we've had over 5,000 people coming in. Every year, every month, there is a queue of 300 people in the front of the door at ASML walking in, joining the company. That organic growth, that increasing organic growth, has led to a problem. And that is what I will be addressing in a minute. What I want you to take away from this is most of the 23,000 employees are in Veldhoven. It's about 12,000. Of those 23,000, about 9,500 are in what we call development and engineering, the R&D side of ASML. And just to give you a bit of sign, 2,000 of them are software, and the rest is electronical development, mechanical development, optical development. And in all honesty, ASML is a pure hardware company. And in that sense, trying to get a transformation of SAFE going in a pure hardware company was a challenge in itself. If you look at how we mastered that growth, any company that has had significant growth in whatever percentage of numbers, your absorption capacity in your organization is the biggest concern that you have. So what you then typically do is the few people that actually know the system, you spread them thin across the many projects that you have. And that's what we started to do in ASML in the past few years. And you end up, if you add up everywhere an arm and a leg from those senior persons, you add your more junior staff to that, you get these Frankenstein-like teams, who should work, they're a team, but they have the rest of the body is in another team, and that project team is actually sometimes in a physical different location. It's with a different project leader on top of it, sometimes even with a different manager on top of it, overseeing it. So in terms of the problem that ASML was facing, we saw actually that teams became the biggest concern that we had. It was not so much finding the people, it was also not so much attracting the people. It was much more about how do we now create an environment where the teams are happy. And we saw that the way that we worked just is not creating the environment that we want anymore. So we had to rethink about our stable teams. And we wrote down a few 10 rules. 4 I want to highlight, because those were the most controversial ones for us. If you have a company that has such a big legacy system, if you just look at the software side with 50 million lines of code, that's significant. It's probably not the biggest one, but it's significant. Owning it, asking people to take ownership in such an archive, same holds for hardware. If you have so many modules lying around to your system, because an ASML scanner, you should physically see it as something which is this stage, and then times 2. Right? Because there's the scanner and there's a lot of hardware and environment around it. So the amount of people, the amount of modules in that system is enormous. Ownership, owning it from cradle to grave, to bring really that feeling of quality also with the engineers. That is one key one. We had project teams, which meant you work on a project. Well, half of you worked on a project and the other half worked on another project. And we had scatterners of, let's say, that typically 65% of the engineers worked on more than 2 projects. So working on multiple projects is a thing, because we now explicitly want to say, as an engineer, you become a part of a team, and as a team you work on multiple projects, which means you need to learn how to work with multiple stakeholders. Dependency management. With such a multifunctional environment that we have at ASML, hardware is not without software. Software is not without hardware. There are dependencies everywhere. And typically, the teams did not manage their own dependencies. Our project lead did. Yeah. So talking about agile transformation, talking about implementing teams, getting them to start to manage their own dependencies was the next big thing. And finally, in an environment that grows so fast, where there are so many people working in projects, getting them to learn again how to improve their own way of working is another big controversial task. Give ownership to the teams, give them the feeling that they can. It's as much a management challenge as well as for the teams. The teams themselves were not used to it anymore. So if you look at it, at what we are stating here, these were the 4 most controversial ones. In the end, in the transformation of ASML, strong and engaged teams, clear ownership on modules, and effective and also high quality execution were the 3 things that we identified. We said in the transformation, there are a number of key elements that we want to get going. We didn't talk about SAFe in the beginning. We started talking about, instead of having pure software teams, pure hardware teams, let's bring the people together that work together. Let's make cross-functional teams. And it doesn't always have to be one Scrum team. It can be a team of teams that is cross-functional. But put them together, put them in one room. Self-organization. The way to master such a significant growth that we have had at ASML is to find a way to unlock the teams to start organizing themselves and start optimizing themselves. A cadence. The one thing that everyone from the beginning believed in is that if you want to make a success of a transformation, bringing synchronization, bringing alignment across all the teams was the thing that was actually the first one that everyone started to buy into. The MVP thinking is the most difficult one. Getting people to understand that from the big machine that we have, where we work with hundreds of people for one release, literally thousands of people sometimes on one release for one customer. If you want to move to a quarterly model, how to make sure that we get a scope for each quarter that makes sense. That is not just saying what you will not do, but what the maximum is that you can do that makes sense. That MVP thinking has been a big thing. And the fast learning is something, if you have so many new people, it revolves around a model that actually facilitates a lot of learning. So in the end, we looked at changing the organization, which we did. A big thing is the cultural change. We ran a number of pilots. we experimented with a number of operating models, and the key thing that actually came about every time in all our discussions was whatever you took as an operating model, so this is still at the time where we were not yet convinced that we should do safe, everyone started to do cherry picking. Everyone said, well, I like that one. Then we did a safe pilot, and they went to a PI event, and they all loved it, and they said, I like to do the PI event. Yeah, but I don't like to do Scrum, and I don't like to do the backlog management. Yeah, then try to explain that the PI event is actually about that. Lost in translation. The amount of conversations that I've had with a project lead who says, isn't that almost the same as doing product management? Is it a team lead almost the same as a Scrum Master? So are we not doing that already? That's another big cultural anti-pattern. Tourist behavior. People that sit around the room and that look at you and say, yeah, probably it work, but not for me. But let's see. And finally, top-down control. We actually had a number of managers stating, I want this, but I want it like that. Yeah? So I don't like that. He started to do cherry picking, but he's trying to push things through. So we saw these anti-patterns happening in the discussions, and that's in the end why we ended up at SAFE. Because starting to talk about SAFE, starting to talk about a model, suddenly we could at least say, a bit dogmatic, well, that's how it works. Yeah? We're not going to talk about PLs anymore because they're not in the framework. But we have 600 PLs. So it's a bit controversial not to talk about PLs. So we had to find roles here. I'll get back to that on how we do that. But the three key things that we took from this framework is that we saw we have to work on team level. We have to get this team of team going and how they plan and deliver. And we need to work on priority setting. Because at ASML, we have program managers that hold big programs, but the budgeting behind them, so if they're, for instance, from one business line, we have 4 big programs, those 4 big programs didn't cooperate. But the teams in there had to deliver to all 4 programs. Yeah, so we have to find a way to get the portfolio management going, and that's a topic that Eelco will address in a few minutes. Looking at how we launched Sonart, because suddenly we saw traction coming. We started with a few release trains, typically a bit in the software side. And then suddenly the interest started to emerge. So we had to think about how do we accelerate launching release trains. Because if we have an ambition, and I'll get to that, I think that's the next slide. If we now have an ambition, by the end of this year, 34%, it actually says second half, but it's by the end of this year, we'll have over 3,000 people doing SAFE. That's actually in the course of 1 year. I'll show you the outline in a minute. You have to start thinking about how do I kickstart release trains? How can I do it fastest? How can I make sure that I get the buy-in from people? How do I prevent it to become a top-down management thing? You have to do SAFE. And then everyone looks at it, yeah, I'm going to do it, but I'm not buying into it, and it's a risk for your transformation. So what we identified is we actually started to talking about teams, the logic of SAFE. We said, everyone, the stable teams is something that everyone felt. The cadence execution was something that everyone thought that makes sense. Having regular alignments, having regular synchronization, that made sense. Scrum teams is where it started to become a little bit more controversial. Yeah, because Scrum teams, particularly on the hardware side, it doesn't work. Unless you start to discuss with them, it actually does work. It's a simple stating on Monday what you're going to do Monday in the coming 2 weeks. It's not that hard. And whether it's a sprint of 2 or 4 weeks doesn't really matter. If you bring it down to those simple statements, you take away the fear of some of the people. So we draw this change ABC. And in the end, we said there are a number of steps. And step C was bringing really teams of teams together. And we thought, let's do it one by one, because we have to convince them. But what we've seen happening is that people themselves started to visit the PI events, started to talk to other places in the organization that actually successfully started with release trains. And they suddenly said, we want to immediately step to what we call here Model C. So instead of having a slow ramp up, we actually now have release trains, everyone asking, can we start a release train? And we have to somehow bring it down to, actually, why do you want a release train? If you look at this picture, this is just a graphical representation. These are all the trains that we're going to start. It's a quarterly model. Every quarter we're going to start a new release train. We do it based on what we call system functions, which means we're now going to start in the optical domain with release trains, which, by the way, also includes software. We're going to start now in a release train where we have our wafer table. We're going to start with a release train where we do our metrology system. That's how we started spinning this off. And this roadmap now shows for this year and early next year the 34 release trains that will starting. And mind you, this is still only 1/3 of D&E. And there's a big one that is not on this list, and that's our roadmap for 2020-21, which is still coming. Bring it back to how we start this transformation approach. The key thing was, it has to be quick, but we need to bring back the discussion to every individual on why we are starting it. So we made a cookbook, and a cookbook simply states, we said, if we want to start from scratch with a team who says, I've heard of SAFe, I think I'm interested, let me experiment it. We said we have a 1/4 program. Within the first, let's say 6 to 8 weeks, it's all about identifying what the problem is that you're trying to solve and get them to buy in that they actually have a problem. The minute that they've bought in that they have a problem, in that time span of 6 to 8 weeks, there's so much enthusiasm happening, that we have this firm go, no go. After 6 to 8 weeks, you've seen that you don't have a problem and don't go to SAFe. We have never seen it yet. It may still come, but so far, everyone gets enthusiastic about the model. And then you go into a rigid 4.5-week preparation towards your first planning event. And that's how we're starting all our release times. So the 6 weeks, and then another 4 weeks, and that, well, sometimes a week longer, and then you end up at your 1/4 for each release train that we prepare this. Having all these trains running, it then brought the question, but there are a lot of traditional roles still. 1/3 of the organization is moving to SAFe, but the other 2/3 is not yet. How does that work? The key thing that you need to understand about trains in ASML, a release train in ASML does not deliver to a single solution. Typically, all release trains in ASML deliver to multiple solutions. And solutions are big. Those are programs of 4,000 people, up to 4,000. We also have smaller ones, but the biggest ones are actually 4,000 people. So what you see, if teams deliver, there is pre-integration starts to happen. So instead of talking only about solution layers, which is the top on our end machines, we also have what we call small solutions. Some of those small solutions act as upgrades to our customers, but they also end up as physical parts of new machine releases. So we have this, let's say, almost an additional layer inside SAFe that we see emerging. Next to that, on the right-hand side, you still have classical projects. Together, they build a machine. So sometimes all the way on the solution layer, release trains and projects come together. Sometimes on the small solutions, they come together. And sometimes the release trains themselves have dependencies, which is not shown here, on classical projects. That's the situation where we're in. So we had to think about how do we manage that. And then we ended up with a simple picture where we say, typically a release train in ASML, what is the laser? Here we have teams, where each team is software and electronical development and mechanical development and let's say industrial engineering. A release train, you spread the teams. It can be that there are really multifunctional teams, but it can also be that there is a software team, an EDEV team, and etc. But the train has all the cross-functional disciplines on board. The project leaders here, we don't call them project leaders anymore. It's still depicted on the slide. But actually the project leaders play for their work, for the dependencies that they have towards non-SAFe trains, still the role of a traditional project lead, but towards the train, they act as epic owners. They hold the work, and they bring the work to the train. But towards other trains that we have, and most likely also other projects that we have, they're simply traditional PLs. And then we need to realize that these are big machines. And these big machines have logistical timelines. We have protos that we need to develop. We have clean rooms, and we have more machines than clean rooms. So we have deadlines to meet in our validation. We can only qualify software and hardware if you're actually physically in the clean room, getting it going. And there are much more requests for access to those team rooms than we have clean rooms. Which means that we need to think about planning. And that's actually on this slide. SAFe, to a large extent, is all about, that's my back button. SAFe is all about a forward plan. It looks 1/4 ahead. But we need to realize that making big machines also has a backwards plan. You have milestones to meet. And those milestones are not there as gates. Those milestones are as awareness to everyone. We have to meet that integration point. We have to have an integration plan. We can't do without an integration plan. But The leading one is our forward plan. Every quarter we program the teams and we start to execute. Yeah? So the notion of having a backwards plan and a forwards plan is what brought a lot of calmness within ASML, that this transformation would actually work.
Yeah, I think that was for me also an eye-opening moment when we started to realize that backwards planning is not gone. Because most people tend to think like, and people say, we're working agile now, so we can't do deadlines. You know, this is kind of a traditional kind of response of agile teams sometimes to planning and backwards planning. But backwards planning is coming from companies like Samsung saying, I need this machine by this time because I need to start integrating this thing in my factory, right? So that was a challenge, and this kind of made me aware, like, wait, you do make a backwards plan, you just don't follow it, right? It was not about not planning this agile thing, it was not following the plan. What was the whole idea? So creating a forward plan based on safe, based on cadence, based on this execution made us really roll. Now the next challenge was, how do we get a company who's used to solve everything with hiring more people and keep saying yes to everything to start making choices? Because that's what portfolio management ultimately is about, right? Do we do A or B? And if we do A and B, which one do we do first? These kinds of questions are prototypical portfolio management questions. So we actually started a cookbook for this part as well because I have many business lines, and we started to figure out that portfolio management in this kind of a space where you're using thousands of people to build a few machines is not something that you can just solve by saying, yeah, just have a portfolio Kanban and you're done. It's too big. It's mind-boggling sometimes what we're seeing here. So we thought, okay, how can we institutionalize something? And the first thing we had to do is create a picture that everybody starts to understand, because portfolio management was an overloaded term. We saw the term everywhere. Okay, so it was for this, for trains, 2 trains in one system function. That was used as we're doing portfolio management. Yes, at this level of one function. So one piece of the machine or something like that. They're doing portfolio management. They have local authority in their system function as arts and as solution trains, if you will, if you look at that system, to develop these things in their own right way. But the portfolio management at the top of a business line saying, okay, we have a roadmap for 5 years, and we have to meet certain deadlines of the market because there's factories being planned on this, and we're not going to go to Samsung saying, we're working agile now, so can you do forward planning with us, please? It may happen in the future, not yet. So we had to do something that says, okay, we have to make sure that we understand portfolio management as it is. So we started using execution management at the art level, and we did recognize that there's not just arts. You cannot isolate the portfolio that you're doing agile from the rest, saying, oh, by the way, the rest, you just have to figure it out. So this was, for me, it feels almost like I had to kind of promote, get like a PhD on portfolio management, because I was really studying hard to figure out how can we get this done, and working a lot with the guys in ASML to see how do we do this. So it was a team effort of a lot of people that have put all their heart, their soul, their energy, their intelligence, and everything in it. This kind of shows at the highest level what we're thinking of. Okay, so the portfolio management is about planning ahead, a couple of quarters, multi-year, and break down the portfolio into epics, portfolio epics, large scale, which is kind of fitting the safe pattern, right? This fits the scaled agile system. If you look at dependency management, which was also seen as portfolio management, we started using that as solution management. Now we start to understand, wait, there's 2 types of solution management, therefore. There's the solution management as per the layer in SAFe, which is more direct, so multiple trains are building one solution. And there's the more virtual part of trains delivering to many solutions, and they have to figure out all the dependencies with the other trains who are doing the same, which is a more complex situation. Your brain can't really deal with that. So this is just to make sure that that's kind of the picture that we started with. This picture started to make people in the portfolio management layers, the typical program managers, enthusiastic about the idea. Oh, wait, now I start getting it. We need to start making choices. So we created a couple of design rules to kind of say, okay, this is what we want to do. The arts need to be synchronized. I don't have to preach to the choir, right? organized around the architectural modularity for the most part. So the most trains we have are built around these system functions. We may see some integration trains or program trains or something, but most of the trains, the dominant part is actually system function based. There's an integration team probably needed, sort of a system team for multiple trains, so we'll need something like that. Issue resolution, so stuff coming out of the field, somebody calling my machine is not working properly, or there's not enough yield, or there's a problem, that needs to be taken into the arts. You know, eat your own dog food, or drink your own champagne is a more nice expression, I guess. So that's it, and the last one was actually the hardest to make people understand. We start funding the arts rather than the programs that are on them. Now, this is leading to a lot of controversy because the Epic owners, as you just saw, are traditional project leads from before, who used to have a bag of money, come to somebody and say, I have this money, now work on my stuff, right? For 0.2 FTE, you're mine. And now they bring this bag of money to the guy in charge of the system function, basically saying, here's a bag of money, can you put it with the rest? What do you mean with the rest? There's a whole pile of these bags of money, and now we together need to figure out what to do first. How do I know my stuff was worked on, etc.? So these kinds of questions pop up. So we started saying, okay, we have to organize something that starts to align this, because the strategy is there. There's these guys running for their own epics in there. We need to make sure that everybody understands what we're trying to do at the scale that we're in. So the first step we made was kind of a cool one, and actually I stole this from the Air France KLM environment, the table, the portfolio table. We started creating tables at the different levels in ASML. So this is the idea of creating a business line table where people are together, multidisciplinary, deciding on that level. And it could have other people from other areas, and these tables kind of govern the portfolio flow from cradle to grave. And well, you can see it here. The product teams and the system functions are in the middle, kind of making tactics, product solution management. Portfolio management is done at the business line. Now the question is, how do you create something now? Because this is all just theory, Kanban, a couple of epics. Yeah, we get it. So we started saying, okay, we need to ritualize this. We need to create something tangible and practical to make this really work. So we came up with something that we invented, the Pope. We had already a pipe, the PI planning event. And after a pipe, there's now a Pope, the portfolio planning event. It consists of about 150 people coming from all the system functions, so they send their representative tables, and the product tables, so the product teams, the teams that are, trying to deliver a specific type of machine to customers like Samsung and TSMC, etc. And these guys are going to be put in a room, and we're going to have a one-day portfolio planning event. We had to seduce people to get this going, and even when people started to become enthusiastic, they started to plan these days without any guidance. So they just had a day and said, oh yeah, we can do that. We have a list of the work we need. We're just going to get everybody in the room. So it's already started before it started. So now that's why we started writing the cookbook, because that can give guidance to people who are over-enthusiastic, you could say. The duration of this is a day. The duration of this is a day. Preparation should take about 4 to 5 weeks, and it consists of about 150 people. The chief product owner for the portfolio is the portfolio owner. Is going to be that role. The portfolio manager sounded good, sounded better than portfolio engineer, especially in a very engineering company. It feels like you're just an engineer now, so it was kind of so we had to use manager, sorry. So release train engineer for the portfolio. So this is where the event starts, and this is where the ritual starts, which means that this is where actual portfolio planning and saying no to stuff starts. Now, the prepping of this means that you need to get epics in there that everybody agrees on, understands on, that are MVP, that are prioritized or pre-prioritized in such a way that you can start comparing them well enough, which is another big question now. How do I do this? So this is the next topic. So if you look at this time scale, it kind of says, we use this to kind of make sure that we align the Pope with the various pipes. Because if you have a lot of trains running, and especially in transformation time, you will see these trains being a little bit like this, right? They won't all be on Monday, right? They will scatter a little bit around the quarterly borders. So we had to think about, okay, when is the Pope most effective for making the rest work again? So we know now that it takes about 4.5 weeks going back and forth between the system functions and what's actually happening, and marketing and sales saying, well, this is what customers ask. This is the new questions. This is the new things we want. And then systems engineering saying, well, we need to figure out how to keep the heat control of a certain component exactly right for this point of delivery. Something like that. So there's system engineering coming in with requirements as well. So this comes in as one kind of session preparation, just like normal backlog preparation. Input, this is a bit the epic definition, and we started using WSTF. What I thought was funny when I started using WSTF, people can't pronounce it properly. They say WJSF, and it's a Joint Striker Fighter or something, I don't know. At the same time, they don't buy into it too well. The interesting thing here was, in a company that has more PhDs than people, was that actually the top part of the WSTF, so the cost of delay, split second. I said, we have to start prioritizing based on cost of delay. Now I get it. Yes, we know how to do that. So the cost of delay was more fitting in this area actually to start with, to say, well, if you delay something for a month or a quarter, what does it mean? And the guy who was in charge of the portfolio immediately said, yes, I get that. Because last time even, there was this big thing in there in the trains built, and I had this change to the lens that would take 3 days. And they say, yeah, it's, next PI, sorry. And he says, what? You can delay this whole big thing by 3 days easily, no impact. So that was his line of thinking. And then, of course, they start to realize after you've sold cost of delay to them, that if you start using the job duration or job size as a proxy for that as the denominator to kind of compare evenly, then it makes sense. And then you say, oh, by the way, we're now using WSTF, but forget about it. Next step, and this was a difficult one, even it was kind of against our own kind of feeling even, was that we had to create something of a more standardized WSTF. So this was I gotcha.
Why are you using man-years for development costs when you've made such a focus on agile teams? I found a better result when I use the average weighted cost of an agile team, because then it doesn't matter if the team is 5 or 6 people. So why are you using man-years instead of weighted cost of an average team?
Okay, so the question here comes before the explanation. Thanks. The reason that we're using man-years, which is against my feeling and my kind of how we think about things, is that this is also for the traditional part of the whole portfolio where we don't have Scrum teams or anything. We don't know average prices for teams. And the other thing is that this is what they have. In their portfolio for the last 10 years or 15 years, they've become quite good in doing these kinds of high-level things. This is an engineering company who is one of the most successful in the world, so they must be doing something right. So I said, okay, let's not try to change everything. Let's try to build on what they know and have, because if they have some stuff that they know, it's going to be really better. So this simple way of doing WSAF like this actually helps them tremendously and quickly doing WSAF without questioning it, because it's connected to their old kind of habits, which is a change tactic, you could say even. So the thing here is that, of course, the scale kind of grows in its bandwidth, as you can see. If you go down at the 20, well, let me go back, it's 150 plus man-years. So there's a large scale there for the 20. So we don't go over 20 because we found that in portfolio management, everybody wants to be the 100. So we said we're not going to have the 100 because that's too far off the rest, so you'll win too easily. Because this is a winning game, right? This is a gamified version of trying to get your right. So this is why we did it like that. There's also some emissions in here. So for example, the reduction of risk, the risk reduction, you can see that scale, it's not complete. Because some of the impact versus chance and probability is a little bit more complex in actuality than this is. But this helps tremendously in nailing down, it's about this one. And if you have one that has high impact but low probability, you say, well, it's not like, well, it's mostly like this. So you can actually connect it to the scale. So we've done this because we couldn't get fast enough calibration between the teams by using some kind of reference wall or other normalization technique, which you would prefer, right? Normally you would say, okay, how does your 20 compare to my 13? And then we learn and we calibrate and we calibrate and then we learn. That would take us too long, and the product teams, the teams with the different products, were too focused on themselves to be really good at this. So we said, okay, we have to create a shared language. This is the portfolio planning event in its roles and who's there. So this is the actual people there. This is all the tables connecting there as a group of people. We've said, look, our system functions can bring more people, but do it wisely because you can only add 3 more people. Because otherwise the session just runs out of hand. This is the total product portfolio management team, you could say, or portfolio train of ASML. The agenda, just like a PI event or a PI planning day, exactly the same process basically, with an opening business context, looking at the roadmap and the milestones and understanding why we're here in the first place. Present demands and changes, what's happening in the market, what do we need. It was kind of shocking to me how volatile this market is for the size of what we do. So this is something that we started seeing, like, look, we normally do a 1-year planning, and as one of the portfolio managers says, the moment the ink is dry, we already have changes. That's of course a matter of speech, because this is not done with ink, it's done in Excel, which is far better. But just to give you an idea, this needs regular catch-ups. So the 3-month kind of cadence does 2 things in this case. It allows you to be flexible and not lie at the start of the year. And it allows you to also say no easier because you've committed to something. Because changes go even faster than we want. If you look at the different marketing and salespeople coming back from client missions with great opportunities, they're all great opportunities. So it's a risk of being, because of your lean startup culture almost in this technical environment, to be too wobbly in following strategy. So the 2 things there kind of connect really nicely. This is kind of a picture that is kind of, I don't want to explain it too much, but it's just to give you an idea of all the rituals we've put in place around the portfolio planning event and the PI events to make sure that it's not just there. The tables have to start interacting by going to other parts of the system. So you visit system demos, you visit retrospectives, you visit all kinds of things, and this kind of gives a sum up of where you should be as a specific table to kind of give value and get value. The key learnings in the last minute: calibrate your WSGF if the portfolio is bigger than a few teams, especially when we're doing now hardware and software. It was hard for us to understand. This helped tremendously in going fast. Solution management was more of a virtual space than we first looked at it. So the pre and post and all these things kind of work for small solutions, for a couple of trains. But if you go into multiple trains and delivering to multiple solutions, it becomes more of a virtual space, which was kind of a learning that we had. Cookbooks, powerful change enablers, because they provide comfort. Sometimes we said, I know you mentioned this before, you said, we're only writing this for hygiene reasons. Because the people who want this are not going to read the cookbook because they can figure it out, but the people who don't want this are going to use it as an excuse not to start if we don't have a cookbook. So that was an interesting way of looking and accommodating different speeds of adoption. And the last one, the ritual tables, is something I would advocate as a change to all of you. I would even suggest this to become more of a part in the portfolio level of SAFE, to create rituals at the higher levels. So this is something that we are, basically thinking about in creating this shared accountability and the cadence for the whole. This is the team. We want to give the credit to the whole team, of course, not just us. We're here as kind of the talking heads, just because I think this is the last slide. So Bas, join me and we can take the massive applause that we'll get, right? Otherwise we have to do it ourselves. Yeah. But I don't want to. I think we do want to say with this slide that these are the folks that in there, and I remember that another agile famous person has once told me when I was talking about this big transformation, the only remark he gave me was, "There's got to be people in there that know how this works. Find them." And that's what we've done over here. We found the people, we're connecting to them, we're building a community, and I think that makes this rock at this scale. Thanks.
Thank you.